Good morning, dear colleagues. Dear colleagues, day 2 of the annual conference of LIBER here in the beautiful city of Budapest. I hope that you had a pleasant night yesterday at the dinner. Now it's time to continue with the second keynote speaker of our program. It's a great honor for me to present Chris Berg, the Director of Libraries at the MIT. Dr. Berg has oversight of the MIT Press, and she is the founding director of the Center for Research on Equitable and Open Scholarship. She has worked 12 years in the Stanford University Libraries and as an active duty US Army officer, including 3 years on the faculty at the United States Military Academy at West Point. She received her BA from Duke University, her MA from the University of Maryland, and her MA and PhD in sociology from Stanford. A few words about the decision to invite Dr. Berg. As program committee, we were particularly interested in Chris Berg for reasons that you can see in the book of the abstracts. Because similar to what Chris Berg mentions about MIT, LIBER wants to be with the ones that work for an open, inclusive, and equitable scholarly communication field. Because in our continent, here in Europe, we experience the marginalization of scholars, we try to help the disadvantaged communities, and we work together to transform a market-oriented model for science and research communication to a principles-based one. We wanted also to invite Chris Berg because MIT libraries, apart from all the great achievements, best practices, strategic visions that Chris will present in the next minutes, MIT libraries have also dedicated their own symbolic capital in this endeavor to open, inclusive, and equitable scholarship. And we value this as a great help for all the libraries. Dear colleagues, please welcome Chris Berg.
That's full service. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Janos, and thank you to the committee for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. I'm really quite delighted to be here and to talk about some things we're doing at MIT, some things we're doing in the MIT libraries, and I hope, I love the phrase, symbolic capital. I hope to, by sharing with you all, I can share that symbolic capital with you all, and you can take it into your context. So let me get started here. Just make sure these, okay. You know, I'm delighted. I love the conference theme, open and trusted, reassessing research library values. And I have to begin my talk by acknowledging that frankly, this is a beautiful city. It's symbolically wonderful to be here in Budapest to talk about open access and open science. And to be honest, it's mildly uncomfortable as a queer woman to be here in a country that has some of the most hideous anti-gay laws that have been passed in recent decades. So it's a little uncomfortable, a little risky, and I applaud LIBER for taking the opportunity to come here and sort of proudly declare and stand up for the values of inclusivity and to publicly side with your LGBTQ colleagues. And I especially applaud anyone here, any of the delegates here who also may have taken a risk to travel here. I appreciate you being here, and I understand that, again, for those of us who are part of the queer community, traveling in places that are not welcoming to us takes on a little extra risk. And again, so those of you who also took that risk, thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, I didn't expect that, but thank you. So that's it, right? I mean, where else but Budapest would you want to be to talk about the role of libraries in open access and open scholarship? You know, invited me to talk about the views and priorities that both the MIT libraries and the research center that Janos mentioned, the Center for Research on Equitable and Open Scholarship, the views and priorities we have set for a more inclusive, a more open, a more equitable and trusted system of scholarly communication. That's one of my favorite topics. So I love to talk about it, both because I'm proud of what we're doing at MIT, and because when I get a chance to talk to others about what we're doing, I find out about shared goals, shared opportunities, shared challenges, and I get that chance to build coalition with others who are, have the same priorities. So I hope that we can have a good dialogue about that, and I can make some connections. But a big theme of what I'm going to talk about is that, you know, we know that in the 2 decades since the Budapest Open Access Initiative declared the possibility and the promise, right, of the worldwide electronic distribution of the peer-reviewed journal literature and completely free and unrestricted access to it. Well, we know that progress towards that goal has been uneven and sometimes painfully and frustratingly slow. Despite, and sometimes because of the best efforts of research institutions and their libraries, open access has too often been co-opted by for-profit publishers, resulting in costly and opaque pay-to-publish models of open access. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my theory about how we got where we are today, but more importantly, I'll then turn to how can we turn that around? What are some opportunities? So my agenda for the talk today, I'm going to set the context a little bit. I'm going to talk about libraries and open scholarship and look back a little bit, again, talk about sort of how we got where we are. Then I'll turn my attention to sharing with you some of what we're doing at the MIT libraries and in CREOS, the Center for Research in Equitable and Open Scholarship. Now that I've said that a few times, can I just shorten it and say CREOS and you'll know what I'm talking? Okay, good, because it's a lot of words. Okay, then I'll do a little bit of forecasting in terms of libraries and looking ahead. And then I'll open it up for a conversation. I know sometimes speakers, I'll open it up for a conversation, which might include questions, but I also have questions for you and some speculations. So first, some context. As I said, I'm always excited to talk to a group of colleagues that I've not met before, some new colleagues, especially those who work in a different context than I do. Because my own experience, frankly, has been rather narrow. I've worked only in 2 libraries, both of them elite research-intensive US institutions. And so that's the bias that I have and the perspective that I bring. And again, I'm quite proud of what we're doing at MIT and in collaboration with others, but it's primarily been with other similar libraries in the US. I'm happy to share about that, even happier to share some of my ideas and experiences. But more importantly, I hope that in sharing that, it prompts you to share your ideas and your experiences so that we can be in conversation and learn from one another. So, setting the context, just a little bit about MIT. It is a research-intensive, highly ranked elite university in the US. In fact, when I talk internationally, I always say it's generally in whatever rankings and whatever faith you put in rankings of universities, which for me is not much, it is usually ranked #1 in international rankings, and somehow #3 in US rankings. So again, don't put too much faith in the rankings, but we are, in fact, quite an elite, well-known, and research-intensive. And one of the measures of how research-intensive it is, just to give you a flavor, we have more graduate students than undergraduates at MIT, really heavily focused on engineering, science, and technology. And important for the talk I'm going to give, MIT has a long history of supporting open. So some 2 decades ago, with open courseware, started to share MIT classes openly with the world. Sort of the founders of the open software movement, many of them come out of MIT. And of course, big emphasis on open scholarship and open access with one of the US's first faculty OA policies. So that's the MIT context, and again, where I'm coming from. So, I'm going to give sort of an abbreviated and again, quite biased view, my view of the recent history of libraries and openness. So in the US, you know, essentially, after the Budapest Open Access Initiative, or around that time, libraries kind of took the lead and were some of the most vocal voices pushing for open access to scholarly literature. And that focus was mostly around the rhetoric of the journals crisis, right? We're all familiar with the journals crisis, right? Skyrocketing journal prices, shrinking library budgets. And that was a real, true, and necessary argument to make. But frankly, it was one that failed to win us many allies outside of the library. And so it was really hard to build a coalition with other people and other organizations and stakeholders in scholarly communication when it was just the libraries and we really focused primarily on budget constraints. It became hard to build that coalition that was necessary. And then even at those institutions like mine and Harvard down the road, who were able to rally their faculty to pass an institutional open access policy, which essentially gives the institution the right to openly share all the journal articles written by their faculty. Even in institutions that have passed those, as far as I can tell, almost all of them were only passed with by giving faculty the assurance that implementing the policy would be done with minimal burden to the faculty. And look, I'm all about reducing administrative and logistical and bureaucratic burdens to anybody, including faculty. But what it meant was that in practice, we never ask faculty and scholarly authors to change their behavior at all. We said, it's minimal burden, we'll take care of it. And I think that was to our detriment, that libraries took on all the burden of trying to change the system of scholarly communication. And what it meant was, of course, that we were taking on this burden in the only place that we had any influence, which was at the negotiating table with publishers. And so, again, my theory is that one of the reasons that open access has only gotten as far as it has gotten is that so much of the work to try and open up the access to scholarly journals has been done by asking one of the least powerful actors in the system, libraries, let's be honest, to take on one of the most powerful actors in the system, the publishers, and to do so at the negotiating table, often with minimal support from our host institutions. That's a heck of a burden. So the fact that we got so far actually is, you know, kudos to us. But it's one of the reasons we haven't gotten as far as perhaps many of us hoped. So here we are today. We're standing on the precipice of a risk of locking in models for open access journals that ensure that commercial publishers still get to reap the same profit margins from well-resourced and research-intensive universities, while simply shifting that inequity that so many of us care deeply about, just shifting that inequity in the system from access to reading scholarship to an inequitable access to publish one's scholarship. And note that by signing sort of big read and publish deals, we, the libraries, are again relieving the scholarly faculty from any responsibilities for changing their behavior in a system that they created. So I sound frustrated. Sometimes I am. But I do think that right now we have a window. We have a window of opportunity as libraries to act boldly and to change that trajectory. And we can change it for what we know to be the good of not just libraries, but for our scholars and for our local and global communities. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do at the MIT libraries, give you some ideas, hope that again, spurs you to share with me what you're doing and your ideas. So at the MIT libraries, our commitment to open is explicitly a commitment to openness and equity in scholarship. And one of our 6 strategic principles is that we are relentless in our pursuit of a more open and equitable scholarly landscape that prioritizes inclusion and reduces the marginalization of scholars and scholarship from disadvantaged communities. And by including that piece about inequity and reducing marginalization, we're sort of committing ourselves philosophically to looking for models that reduce inequity rather than increase it or prop it up. So some of the things that we've been doing at the MIT libraries. So we passed an open access policy in 2009, and that has been the cornerstone of our open scholarship strategy. And it's been about getting faculty journal articles into our open repository and making them openly available freely to the world. Now, one figure that I am quite proud of is that since 2009, 60% of articles written by MIT's faculty are openly available in our repository. Now, I share that figure often in many settings, and whenever I share it, I say, and I think that's the highest number of any US institution. No one has told me it's not, so I choose to believe it's true. We also keep track of the downloads, and nearly 24 million in that time, 24 million downloads. Are the MIT theses and dissertations written by our graduate students are also open by default. As necessary, students can ask for an embargo, but the default is that they are open, and something north of 90% are open immediately. So one of the other ways we in the libraries are trying to advance open is via a new prize for early career researchers who use our Create Open Data in creative and impactful ways. So last year, for the first time, we created an Open Data at MIT prize. We weren't sure how it would go. I teamed up with an open science advocate in the School of Science at MIT to do this, to sponsor this. We put out a call for nominations, and it was one of those things where you throw a party and you hope that somebody comes. We were thrilled that we had 70 nominations. 70 nominations for this prize. We were so overwhelmed this first year we were doing this that although we had planned on only giving out 2 or 3 prizes, we ended up giving out 10 because we didn't want to limit it, and we actually named several honorable mentions. Perhaps as importantly, we hosted an event to give out the prizes. The graduate students and the undergraduates and the postdocs who won the prizes were given 5 minutes to share about their project and how they either used or created open data. And then afterwards, we hosted these different tables where people could mingle and talk with people across MIT who were working with or on open data so they could meet each other and make those connections and start to sort of celebrate open data across the Institute. We're going to do it again this year, and one of the things is you do something, if it's successful the first year, other people do want to join you. So we're hoping that some of the other schools will join in and help fund it, because it was funded. The funding for the prizes came out of special funding I asked for and received from the provost. Although I will say, in terms of the Open Data Prize, every single one of the recipients said that it was less about the money and more about having a line to put on their CV. Because we focused on early career researchers who are going to be looking for jobs soon. And to have a line on CV that says I was a winner of the MIT Prize for Open Data doesn't hurt. So there are some things that we in the libraries can do that maybe don't take a lot of resources, but can start to provide those rewards and incentives for open scholarship behaviors. We also set up an open monograph fund. Again, I got some special funding from the provost for that. And that's basically so that we can subvent the open monograph charges that many university and other monograph publishers charge for any MIT author who wants to make their scholarly monograph open. And we've funded 22 books so far through that fund. And then we also launched the Center for Research on Equitable and Open Scholarship, CREOS, So let me talk about that quickly. We launched that in 2019. I was able to take some discretionary money from the libraries to launch it sort of small and then go out and get grants. And so far, we've brought in close to $2 million in grant funding. We've funded some postdocs, a visiting scholar, a handful of students, to produce original research that would inform the development of more equitable and open systems of scholarly communications. We're currently in the middle of applying for a grant from the National Science Foundation to plan a fellowship program that would allow us to hire and support many more researchers who we would match up with specific open science projects and interventions that are already happening so that they can provide the evaluation and analysis of how successful they are at meeting their goals. Because that is a place where we're really, I think, there's a deficit of good evidence-based research to support all of the different efforts many of the players are making to try and advance open scholarship. We need to be doing this from a place of evidence. And so that's part of what launching this center in the library was about. Okay, so one final way that we're trying to advance open is by sharing with groups like this and anyone else who will listen what we know and what we have learned from our recent experience with Elsevier. And I share this as an example. And the bottom line, for those of you who don't know, MIT has been completely out of contract with Elsevier for 3 years now. And we've learned a lot that we think will be valuable to others. So the path to that cancellation started more than a year before the negotiations with Elsevier. Hold on. So it started with developing something we call the MIT framework. And the MIT framework is, we launched that because, or we developed that because if one of the main tools that libraries have in advancing open is in negotiation with publishers, we wanted to be purposeful and transparent with our community about what were the principles on which we were negotiating, and we wanted to get their buy-in about that. So we published this framework. It was endorsed by all the senior leadership at MIT. We spent a year going around to different departments and the schools and talking to faculty and talking to the deans and talking to the provost and getting buy-in. And then we published it, and then it was also endorsed by 200 external organizations, mostly libraries across the US, who endorse these principles. So let me share with you a little bit about what the framework is. It's a simple set of principles that says we're going to try and negotiate licenses where there's no author is required to opt out of any pre-existing open access policy that they are under, either from their institution or from their funder. There's a principle about rights retention. We were trying to include something about auto deposit of author final manuscripts to institutional repositories as a service that we might pay publishers for. One of the principles was that there would be easy computational access to the content. Obviously, we were looking for fair and transparent costs. And basically, the whole framework was about the idea that our scholars and our institutions do value the services that publishers provide, and we're willing to pay a fair and transparent price for those services, but we don't want to keep paying rent for content that our own scholars are producing. So, Elsevier, we negotiated with Elsevier around the framework. They failed to produce a framework-aligned contract for us. Just to note, I think it might have been on the previous slide, we do have 10 successful contracts that we have negotiated that are aligned with the framework. And that ranges from small society publishers to large commercial publishers. But Elsevier failed to produce a proposal for us that aligned. And so with the backing, again, backing of the faculty and the leadership who already said, yes, negotiate according to these principles of the framework, we came back to them and said, none of these proposals meet our framework, so we have to walk away. And we had already set all that up, so we went out of contract with Elsevier in June of 2020. And then not long after the University of California system, after having been out, they were similarly out of contract with Elsevier for I think about 2 years. They signed a big read and publish deal, and then I think it was right after a similar deal with JISC. Then Elsevier came back to us and said, are you willing to try again? We had a number of conversations with them. They still were not able to produce, either unable or unwilling to produce a contract that aligned with our principles, and so we walked away again. And what we're doing now is satisfying our community's need for more recent Elsevier content through a pay-per-article service that is nearly instantaneous. It's not quite as easy as straight through Science Direct, but 95% are coming in less than a minute. And we're doing it just paying per article. So, hold on, I missed. Okay, we're paying per article, and that big 10% there is important. So right now we're paying per article, so we're only paying if somebody really wants to read an article at a cost that is approximately 10% of our old contract. Even adding in what we tend to term spending in the wild on APCs, so about 10% of MIT authors who were publishing with Elsevier journals were paying their own APCs. Even if we add those in, it's still around 10 or 11% of a big contract. All right, this is where I stop and say 10%. Yeah. That's probably the biggest message I want to get across. All right, let me do this quickly because I'm already over time, I think. So looking ahead, what can and should we do to advance open scholarship in libraries? I think we do have limited power, but we've got to leverage it. I think we need to repurpose our collections budget, and I just showed you a little bit how. I think there's lots of funder requirements in the US and elsewhere that are taking effect, and we have to respond to those and use those as leverage with our faculty. We have to build cross-sector coalition, and then we have to, changing scholarly communication is a cultural change, and we have to do our part to support that. Okay, what do I mean by leveraging our power? I know it's hard to get the support of faculty and campus leaders to walk away from a big publishing contract, for example. It's one of the reasons why I share our story. Again, we've been out of contract for 3 years, and as far as I can tell, nothing. We haven't missed a step. I think MIT is still producing groundbreaking research and is still regarded as quite a powerful university. So I tell this story not to brag, but so that others can use our success to show your faculty that at a big prestigious research university like MIT, we can continue to do great work without paying for these bloated contracts to a bunch of content that apparently we're not using. So we need to be willing to walk away. I was told once early in my career by a colleague that if you're not willing to walk away, you're not really negotiating, you're just having a conversation. So you've got to be willing to walk away. I think we also need to think about what the goals are in negotiating and in the willingness to walk away. And so originally, we had hoped that by walking away, by being clear with Elsevier that, and with other publishers that, this is what we want and we're not going to sign a contract that doesn't give us what we want, that perhaps models would change. Once you see the University of California sign their contract, others are signing big read and publish deals with Elsevier and others, that seems to not be the case. So that didn't work. No one else had, I mean, it hadn't been tried. There hadn't been very many large research universities in the US that had walked away, so we didn't know if it would work to change the publisher's behavior. It didn't seem to work. So now I'm readjusting our goal, and I'm looking at that money I'm saving, and I'm saying maybe it's time to not buy things we don't need and spend that money on things that we do think will change the system. So again, I want to really, really hit home here on this point. We actually hired a consultant to do a deep dive analysis for us on the cost of publishing and reading. And we used Elsevier as an example because that is the natural experiment we have going on right now. And that analysis shows very, very clearly that reading, per article reading, is cheaper by far. And as various open access policies take effect and more of the scholarly literature is open with no embargo, that's going to keep getting cheaper. Moreover, we know that commercial publisher APCs are opaque, they are costly, and they are likely to continue to increase because the publishers are going to have to recoup the money that they're losing from subscription costs. And so, again, just another really bottom line at 10%, I want you to remember, and I want you to realize that the publisher contracts right now are offering no economies of scale for us. No economies of scale. So, flipping from pay to read to pay to publish is a bad idea. I think many of you agree. Not only does it have the equity problems that many of us in the libraries have been highlighting for such a long time, but it's also too expensive. It's too expensive, it's getting more expensive, and one argument that I've found has resonated with my faculty is that it drains, even if funders are willing to fund APCs, that money, that's not an unlimited bucket of money. And so we are draining research dollars off to pay for publishing fees instead of having it go to a piece of research equipment or other sort of our graduate student or a postdoc. So it's draining funds from core research. So how can we pay for publish? Well, I hope many of you, probably can't do it now, but I hope many other libraries will see what we've done. We'll be publishing the analysis of the cost soon. But it's clear to me that switching to per article reading is a huge savings for library budgets. If we pool that savings with others, we might have enough money to invest in some real alternatives that are nonprofit alternatives for publishing, perhaps leveraging the power of our university presses. And we have to do that through radically cooperating and collaborating, and we have to do it through change in culture and behavior. So again, some of the incentives that we can start to seed through the libraries. Let's see, okay. Really quickly, some of the collaborations that the MIT libraries are involved in, something called Helios in the US, which is about 100 universities that have joined together with blessings from the highest levels of leadership, provosts and presidents, to coordinate on best practices and collective action. And then MIT is a member of Ivy Plus, which is, the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, et cetera, the big elite universities in the US. And we're trying to leverage our symbolic capital to influence policies and behaviors. I'll skip that, that's super US-centric. And just try to, again, I'm happy to take questions, but I'm even more happy to hear your comments. I know you're supposed to say everybody likes questions instead of comments, but I don't know everything. I like comments. I like to know what you're thinking. And some of the questions I have for you is, how do we overcome barriers to collaboration amongst libraries? How do we get buy-in from other stakeholders in the system, particularly our faculty and our administrative leadership, but also funders and government agencies? And then a speculative question. If we imagine that we did have the power and the influence, what would we do? if we had the power and we had the money, and I've shown you how you can save it, what would we do? What would the alternatives look like? And then let's think about what power do we already have? So those are the things I hope we'll talk about. And thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, dear Chris. We have 5 minutes for questions or comments. I know that there are very, very few. But I guess that you will agree with me, it was very hard to give a signal that the time is running out. Okay, I was captivated also. So I think that you will forgive me for not keeping, the time. So we have 5 minutes, either for questions or for comments. Anyone from the floor? Anna.
Hi, thanks, Chris. That was really interesting. Anna Clements from the University of Sheffield in the UK. And obviously, we've been negotiating with Elsevier, with Springer Nature. Yep. I'm also part of the N8 and the N8 Plus, which is a group of research-intensive universities in the UK, where we were looking at Plan B, walking away, and so on. And I can say with the Elsevier negotiations, it was reasonably successful. With Springer Nature, it wasn't, in the sense that we got to a point. And although I think I and perhaps for some of my fellow directors thought we should walk away, because effectively with Springer Nature we were accepting the premise of the €9,500 APC, and we did accept that. So my question is, and part of it is collective responsibility.
Yes.
But also, I suppose my question to you is, have you had negotiations with Springer Nature? And where, if you have or haven't, what's the view there of how you might, would you walk away?
So I was afraid of that question. So we have a signed contract with Springer Nature. It is not an ideal contract. It aligns better with the framework than others. And we did not, we signed a short-term, for us, a relatively short-term contract where we are hoping to continue to work with them. But it's not a contract we were super happy to sign. But we had done the work, when we went around sort of socializing the MIT framework, we made it clear that we had some negotiations coming up with Elsevier and what might happen if they endorse this framework and we went to Elsevier with these principles and they weren't met, that it might mean we would cancel Elsevier. And even though we were kind of clear that we're going to use this with all the publishers, the community wasn't expecting that we might cancel Springer Nature. So we didn't feel like we were ready for that. So we have signed a deal. It's not one of my favorites. Our deal with PLOS is one of my favorites, by the way. But we signed a relatively short-term deal so that we'll see what happens. I was just thinking that. And the N8 and IV Plus might be a really nice, yes, thank you. Awesome. This is exactly what I hoped would happen. Thank you. And I am going to hang around afterwards, so if folks have other questions.
Okay, if I may, I have a question here. Okay, so hi Chris, a pleasure to listen to your presentation, extremely inspiring. If I may say, Roberto Di Cosmo, I'm coming from Iria in France, and actually I'm on the faculty side, I would say. So I heard you had difficulty bringing the faculty on board on this campaign. I think things are changing. Part of the faculty discovered that, for example, paper publishing is actually completely distorting the evaluation environment for promotion and faculty. So this is an argument I would really push forward. You have friends in faculty right now. If you look, there was a statement published by Informatics Europe just a couple of weeks ago, which brings together all learned society in computer science in Europe, which is precisely aligned with what you said. Yeah. So I do hope you you will look not only for collaboration with libraries, but also with
Absolutely.
Learner societies, which are on your side.
Yes, thank you. That's such a great point, and I think you're absolutely right. And I already went over my time, but there's a whole part about scholarly societies and the important role they play. And of course, there's not unanimity across faculty. I mean, I still have many prominent faculty at MIT who have literally made the argument to me that a $9,000 APC is a drop in the bucket. And what I have to do is look around the room when they say that and see which faculty are rolling their eyes at that, and then that's the faculty I start with. I start to collaborate with, right? So, but that's the scholarly societies are where you can get the real faculty collective action, and I think that's absolutely right. Thank you.
One last question.
My name is Hubertus Neuhausen from Cologne University Library from Germany, and I asked myself whether there isn't an elephant in the room we are all not talking about, which is Sci-Hub. Maybe the windows of opportunity which exist now does only exist because we are able to go to Sci-Hub and to read a lot of articles there. And I'm not sure, in Germany we have a boycott for Elsevier as well, and I think the only reason we survive this boycott for the last years is because there's Sci-Hub and the scientists are able to go to.
Yeah, I think that's quite important, right? We know that there are pirate sites and copies of articles in Sci-Hub and elsewhere we have no way of knowing how much our faculty are using that sort of mechanism to obtain the literature. And certainly we don't know how our students are using all kinds of methods that we may not agree with, but I've always said that I think that the existence of pirate libraries, if you will, is really a signal to us, a very, very strong signal to us that the system is broken and that it is, as libraries, it is our responsibility to do everything we can to right the ship, right? I mean, so I think there's something almost, dare I say, inspiring about in the sense that it should inspire us to find a system where something like Sci-Hub isn't necessary. Like, that's where we should be heading. Sci-Hub shouldn't be necessary. But, the usage shows that it clearly is necessary for many who have no other means of obtaining the literature that they need. And, I'm of the opinion that, access to knowledge is a universal human right. It certainly should be. And if it's not available through sort of standard legal means, again, civil disobedience is a wake-up call to all of us to make sure that that's not necessary.
Once again, an applaud for Chris.